This is a Renegade Media Network podcast.
I got to tell you guys about Zippix nicotine toothpicks. They're flavored toothpicks with nicotine in each one. I want to tell you about them because you might have heard them advertised now on some other podcasts because their name is getting out there. Let me tell you this little fact. This was the first podcast that they ever advertised on, and that is because I actually reached out to them. I already used this product, and I thought I might as well advertise for them. That's how much I like them, and I still use them all the time. They're flavored toothpicks, like I said, with nicotine in each one. Check out the flavors. Peppermint, watermelon, excellent. They've got the old school cinnamon. Remember the cinnamon toothpicks you would have as a kid? This is basically the adult version. They've got sweet whiskey, sweet wood. They've got mocha, spice, island clove. Very, very good as well. So basically, if you're trying to kick a bad habit, maybe go for the cheapest alternative on the market. That would be Zippix toothpicks over at zippixtoothpicks.com. And of course, they want to support this show, and so do you. And if you want to buy some of these toothpicks, that helps this show out. So promo code BUCK at checkout, BUCK, gets you 20% off of your order. That is 20% off when you enter promo code BUCK, BUCK, at zippixtoothpicks.com. Let's get to the show.
You are now listening to the Counterflow Podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in fucking half, but I call the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again to another episode of the Counterflow Podcast. Thank you for being with me. Welcome to all the new folks who have jumped on board. And I think it's been said that my guest today, Edward Dutton, is a bit controversial. We will get to that shortly. I'm glad to have him on. You know, I certainly don't shy away from anyone with that label, and I am definitely excited to share this interview with you. I also wanted to tell you about the Renegade University weekend here at my house in Lockhart, Texas. So as you heard, as you know, probably, I am part of the Renegade Media Network, owned by Mr. Thaddeus Russell, who also runs Renegade University. Well, in October of this year, specifically October 8th through 10th, we are having the Renegade University weekend, Lockhart, Texas edition. And yes, that is the small town in Texas where I live, also known as the barbecue capital of Texas, which pretty much means the barbecue capital of the world. Let me tell you the special guests that will be there. Hotep Jesus, Jack the Perfume Nationalist, Scott Horton, Deirdre McCluskey, Cody Wilson, Thaddeus Russell, and myself. I'm going to put a link to how you can get tickets to it in every episode from here on out until we sell out, which actually could be soon. I think the VIP tickets are sold out. I will say this, there will be more special guests other than the ones I just read off to you. Put it that way. It's going to be a good time. You can find it at renegadeuniversity.com. Again, I'll give you my specific link in the show notes page for this episode. What else do I want to tell you before I get to my guest? Oh, the YouTube page. I keep advertising it because we didn't give it enough love for several years. And now we're doing all kinds of things, including every interview I do on this show, including the one today with Edward Dutton, is going to be up on the YouTube page. All you do, of course, is search Counterflow with Buck Johnson. And also, what you won't hear on these podcasts, on your podcast feed for Counterflow, is I will be doing live streams. I'm going to try to do once a week. We shall see if I'm able to keep up with that. But certainly, as often as I can, I will be doing live streams. I've already done one with the On Fire as of late. No, On Fire really as long as I've known him, and that is Matt Erickson over at Real King Pilled. I did one with him. I've done one with my friend Tho Bishop, and we were going over the Rothbard-Rockwell report, which we will be doing multiple times after that. We will be going through lots of those issues. So go check out the YouTube page. Give it a subscription. That way, anytime something pops up, it will alert you to go check it out. And again, the live streams will not be transferred to the podcast feed, so you can only see them on the YouTube page. Okay, enough talking. Let's get to my guest, Edward Dutton. So I've got this book, At Our Wits End, Why We're Becoming Less Intelligent and What It Means for the Future. It's good. I can tell you I devoured this thing quickly. It's a good read. It's not too long. Let me see. It's about just over 200 pages. And since our IQs have dropped over the last few decades, sometimes shorter books help. Let me tell you about Edward Dutton. He likes researching controversial topics. You find that out quickly here in our intro. If someone insists that a certain area is out of bounds and you're immoral for even contemplating it, he says, then that is where new discoveries are going to lie. He's the author of several books, and we will get into further details about him right now when I bring him on. Edward Dutton, welcome to the show, sir. How are you?
Hello. Hi. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, after getting a couple of your books and reading them, I'm stoked to have you here. I've never had you on before, so I guess we should get a proper introduction of what you do and what kind of got you into writing some of the, let's say, controversial topics that you write about.
Well, I suppose I'm an independent academic. I'm affiliated to a small business school university in Poland where I'm honorary full professor of evolutionary psychology. But mainly I'm an independent academic. I do research on various topics such as intelligence, and I've also written about race differences, feminism, various topics. And I suppose what gets me into it is that I'm just particularly interested in and fascinated by the truth, by making sense of the world, which used to be what academics were supposed to do. And so obviously, if you tell me that I mustn't look at a certain area and a certain area is morally wrong and you're bad if you look at it, then what that tells me is that the fact that you have to put it in those emotional terms means that you have secret doubts about the veracity of what you're saying. And what you're saying is basically a reflection of ideology. And therefore, if we want to really understand the world, then we should go for those areas. Those will be the areas where new truths will be found and a more nuanced understanding of the world will be found. And so I and my colleagues find ourselves attracted to those kinds of areas.
I want to get into the book At Our Wits End. I enjoyed reading it, but before I do that, I got to ask, have you seen an American movie called Idiocracy?
Everybody asks me this, and precisely because everybody asks me, I will make a point of never watching it.
Okay. I'm not a movie guy at all, so most of the time when someone says, Buck, have you seen this? The answer is no. Interestingly enough, this is one I've seen. It's funny, it's a similar theme, but it's not deemed controversial for whatever reason.
There's a fundamental flaw in it, which is that, as I understand it, as I say, I haven't seen it, but as I understand it, the process of indumining takes place over hundreds of years.
Yes.
Hundreds and hundreds of years, but that's not what we're seeing. That's not what's going to happen. It's something that will take place over 100 years.
Well, that's a great starting point then to jump into, kind of give a summation of what At Our Wits End is about.
Well, it brings together the evidence that we're becoming less intelligent. And there's a huge body of evidence in that regard that you could look at it on various different measures. And I have a copy of the book here. And so basically the idea is that until around the time of the Industrial Revolution, so from about the Dark Ages, we were under harsh Darwinian selection pressure. And one of the things that we were selecting for was intelligence. And we know that the richer 50% of the population in Europe in the early modern era had around double the completed fertility as the poorer 50%. So that implies that intelligence was going up. There are other things that imply intelligence was going up. The size of the head was going up, and this is weakly correlated with intelligence. Even though living standards weren't really going up very much, literacy was going up, and numeracy was going up, and criminality and violent crime and whatever was going down. And so there's all these reasons to think that we were selecting for intelligence, because if you were more intelligent, then you could create a better environment for your children, you could create a more healthy environment, they could have access to healthier food and all this sort of thing. And so they'd be more likely to survive. And we know that the society was a society of social descent. So the population was being bootstrapped. Every generation, those at the bottom didn't pass on their genes. And those one rank up on the social ladder would move down to fill the places that were vacated by them. And that is why we in England, native English people are all, 99% of us are descended from King Edward III for this reason, because every generation intelligence goes up, the higher people get more intelligent, and those at the bottom are simply removed. And so intelligence increases every generation. So we know this is happening. The heritability of intelligence is extremely high. It's at about 0.8. So it's very, very strongly genetic, very, very strongly to do with genes. And another thing we can trace across time is per capita major innovation, because the smart faction, the most intelligent people, they innovate the important things. And that's going up across time. So we know that intelligence was going up. And it reaches a peak in around 1870. And then on various measures, we see intelligence start to go down. Now, what happens is that I note in the book, myself and my colleague Michael Woodley of Mani, is that you have the big change is the Industrial Revolution. So once you have the innovation of the Industrial Revolution, which is a reflection of the high intelligence of the population, well, you weaken Darwinian selection pressure. Suddenly you have better living conditions, you have better medicine, you have inoculations, you have all of the benefits of the Industrial Revolution. And this is able to the increasing innovations are able, which improve the standard of living, are able to outpace population growth. So the result of this is a population spike. And we see a change from what we had before the Industrial Revolution of 50% child mortality or thereabouts, to a gradual decline in child mortality down to 1%, as it is today. And what this is paralleled by is a clear decline in intelligence. Now, why is that decline in intelligence happening? Firstly, because we were selecting to be intelligent. So you would expect intelligence, which is highly genetic, remember, to be associated with other markers of genetic health, other things we were selecting for, such as good genetic health. And it's known that the people that have low IQ, that correlates with having genes that are associated with bad health, basically. So that's the first reason why intelligence starts to go down. Secondly, you have, of course, the rise of contraception. And this is taken up more readily by the upper classes who are more intelligent. They limit their fertility more. They don't have children by accident. And so therefore, large families become a product of just people having low IQ people not thinking for the future and getting pregnant by accident. So that's the second issue. The third issue is feminism. Really, which means that more intelligent women will dedicate all of their 20s and even the first half of their 30s to their careers and limit their fertility. Less intelligent women have more children. And not just that, but more generations. There was a case in Edinburgh that was reported last week of a woman who is 86 years old. She is a great-great-great-grandmother. And she has 90 great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, and now a great-great-great-grandchild. And all of these people have had children aged about 18. So that sort of thing. And then, of course, welfare as well means that people that have lower IQ are literally encouraged to have more children. And the data in England indicates that if you divide the population between those that have, when both parents work, IQ of 100, those where one parent works, IQ of 90, and those where both are on welfare, IQ of 85, 80, it's only those where both parents are on welfare that have above replacement fertility. So all of these factors have come together, and they mean there is now a negative correlation of about -0.2 between intelligence and how many children you have. And in the book, we chart. There's many measures on which this is happening that you can trace across time. So let me just find the right section. So the first is, you can see a graph here. I don't know if you can see this, but this is the rise and fall of per capita of the use of difficult words. So in terms of the per capita innovation, which is a good measure, we are now back to where we were in 1600. In terms of use of difficult words, we are now back to where we were in about 1650, 1700. In terms of simple reaction times, we've been recording these since the 1880s, and these have been getting longer. And reaction times are a correlate. How quickly you can react to stimuli is a correlate of intelligence. So reaction times are getting longer, consistent with us having lost about 15 IQ points since about 1880. Color discrimination, which is the ability to distinguish between different hues. This is a mark of intelligence, because the more intelligent you are, intelligence is the ability to solve complex problems and how quickly you solve them. And you will solve that problem better the more information you can take in, and therefore the more subtle are the differences you can perceive. While color discrimination is getting worse. Use of high difficulty words is getting worse. Backward digit span, that's a mark of intelligence, that you can learn a list of numbers and then repeat them backwards. We're getting worse at that. Spatial perception is getting worse. As I said, genius levels have gone back to where they were in 1600. Creativity is getting worse. And most importantly, the percentage of the population that carry alleles that are associated with very, very high educational attainment, and thus with high intelligence, is decreasing across time. And we know this isn't caused by pollution or whatever, as some people argue, because, as I say, it's these alleles that are decreasing across time. So all of this is very, very strongly consistent with the idea that intelligence is declining, and it's declining for genetic reasons substantially, and for the reasons set out. And that's the essence of the book.
Well, when I have broached this topic with certain friends, I kind of came into it thinking it is what it is, and I find it fascinating, and quickly learned that a lot of people do not like discussing this topic of IQ specifically. And even the smarter people who are not politically correct that I would bring this up would get offended, and it kind of caught me off guard. I was surprised, to be quite honest, initially. Why do you think the topic of IQ is so controversial?
Well, I suppose it's because deep down people know that how intelligent you are is very important. And it's very important to your life outcomes. So, for example, people, first of all, IQ is a clear measurer of intelligence in the same way that a weighing scale is a clear measure of weight. We know that what makes a weighing scale a reliable measure of weight is that you can weigh it with that scales, and you can weigh it with the different scales, and you can get people to lift up people and estimate how heavy they are, and you can intercorrelate them. And if they correlate strongly, then you know it's a good weighing scale. So it's the same with IQ tests. IQ tests correlate with other markers. What we mean by intelligence is the ability to solve problems and how quickly you solve them. We know this is a real thing. Even sort of primitive tribes recognize something like the concept of intelligence, something like the concept of being smart. And these IQ tests, they measure it, and they correlate with other markers of it, such as how well you do in school, exams, for example. They correlate with that at about all your, these are, what's this thing you do in America when you want to get into university, these standard grades, whatever they're called, these tests. They correlate with that at about 0.7. They correlate with how educated you are across your lifetime at about 0.5. They correlate with how much you earn at about 0.3 or 0.4. They correlate with all of these important social outcomes. I mean, in the book, there's a huge list of them: talking speed, how criminality negatively, achievement, motivation, how healthy you are, whether you participate in elections, whether you do extracurricular activities, even height it weakly correlates with, because women are sexually selecting both for height and for intelligence, and so the two things go together, or because height is an expression of good genes and of health, and so is a quick working mind. Income, interests, memory, military rank, moral reasoning, musical preference, occupational status, reading ability, social skills, social economic status achieved, social economic status born into, sports participation, trusting nature, negatively with dogmatism, impulsivity, infant mortality, obesity, conservatism, religiousness, racial prejudice, smoking, single motherhood. And so it is a very important thing, and so therefore it can be difficult for some people to talk about that, and it feels like it's kind of judging people, and it feels just sort of not very nice to think that there is this thing, and it's a highly genetic thing, and it's nothing, you can't control it in any way. It's either genetic, which you can't control, or it's to do with environmental things, which, well, you can control to some extent. So if you hang around with more intelligent people, it will boost your intelligence to its phenotypic maximum. So, and people who are intelligent will tend to gravitate towards more intelligent people, and thus boost their intelligence to its phenotypic maximum by being highly intellectually stimulated all of the time. But in general, it's something you can't control. There's not much you can do about it, and it has a big impact on your life. And so people can obviously be a little bit uncomfortable about that. Quite why they are more uncomfortable than they are about personality, which is also significantly genetic, and which also massively impact how well you're doing in life. I don't know. I guess it's because we live in a technocratic society, and in a society like that, intelligence is very important, and we are increasingly cognitively stratifying along intelligence lines.
I want to tell you guys about the official coffee of the Counterflow podcast, and that is Lorenzotti Coffee over at lorenzotti.coffee. I don't really want to specifically tell you about them because I drink it every morning, because I love it, because it's directly imported from Italy. It's in these vacuum sealed packs. It's in these beautiful tins that look very good on your kitchen counter. Those aren't really the reasons I want to tell you about them. The real reason is because in this day and age, with all of the insanity going on, I think it's nice to be able to have companies that are very like-minded that we can support. And that's very helpful. You know, everyone's scared now, like, should I support this company? I don't know, are they crazy? Well, I can tell you, the guys at lorenzotti.coffee are really good guys. They're like-minded individuals, and they want to support shows like mine that you listen to. So I think if they're willing to give me a cut of the money coming into them from you guys, that should make you want to support them. You like this show, you want to support like-minded companies, well, here's one for you, Lorenzotti Coffee over at LORENZOTTI.coffee. I'll tell you one thing, if you type in promo code BUCK, B-U-C-K, at checkout, you will get 10% off of your order. You'll be supporting a very good company. The coffee is amazing, and it helps me out too. So if you like this show, give it some support. Now back to the show. One of the criticisms that was lobbed my way when I discussed this and bringing up that there is a large genetic component to it is, well, look at the Koreas, North Korea and South Korea. Why do the people in North Korea have a lower IQ than the ones in South Korea? And it's because of the communism and the control over everyone's life. And rather in South Korea, they flourish more because of their environment. Is there anything to that?
I don't know that we have sound IQ data for North Korea. So no, we don't. How would we know the North Korean IQ? Right. They're not going to tell us. So I don't think there's much to that at all. I think it is true that you're going to get there is an environmental component of somewhere at the individual level of somewhere in the region of 20% to intelligence. And so it's perfectly true that if you administer IQ tests to very poor Africans, then who are not experienced in using paper or pens, who have never seen an IQ test before, then it is going to be a less fair instrument for them than if you administer it to, people living in Western countries, or indeed Africans living in Western countries. So that's true. There is an environmental element to it. But the evidence that this is a fair instrument is that it correlates with other intuitive markers of what we mean by intelligence very strongly, in the region of about 0.8, 0.9. And also, when they have attempted to make it culture fair, so they've said, oh, well, look, this test is unfair on working class pupils. We need to eliminate certain words that they might not know, or it's unfair on black people. What you find is that the working class children, or the black children, or whatever, they actually do worse on the more culture fair tests. The more culture fair it is, the worse they do, because the more culture fair it is, actually, of course, the better a measure of intelligence it is. And with these people, that intelligence tends to be lower. So there's no reason to think it discriminates against people from different classes, really. There's no reason to think it discriminates against people from different races. There's this notion of stereotype threat, this idea that you're told you'll do badly in something and therefore you do. That's the evidence for that has been basically comprehensively debunked. It suffers from publication bias and from inconsistency and not being replicated and things like this. So there really are, I'm afraid, no major problems or flaws with the IQ tests. And as I said, they correlate with all kinds of other tests strongly, which are far more objective, such as reaction times, such as color discrimination. And you can't argue there's much cultural about, sort of seeing a light go on and flick a switch, or even just head size. There's not brains, cranial capacity. There's nothing cultural about that. So I mean, I think this is as good an instrument as any that we have in social science.
You discuss emotional intelligence in the book. Can you contrast emotional intelligence with the intelligence that IQ measures?
Well, IQ measures, I guess, what we would call systematic intelligence, so the ability to systematically solve a problem. Emotional intelligence, there are two ways you could interpret that. One is to say the ability to solve social problems, and the ability to say, okay, there's these people, and he feels like this, and he feels like this, and what should you do? And it's been found that correlates with simple IQ at about 0.3. So people who are more intelligent are on average more emotionally intelligent. Of course, you're going to get outliers who are super intelligent, like Sheldon Cooper types, and who are a bit autistic. But in general, another way of understanding it is a component of personality, which is really empathy, which is the ability to correctly understand how you are going to think in a certain situation, and to read external signals, external cues of internal traits, and that's what we call empathy, and that's rather more in the personality realm of things rather than in the realm of intelligence and problem solving.
One of the segments of the book I loved was your section on interest rates, because time preference, and it's something, for some reason, I'm always fascinated by this topic. Hans Hermann Hoppe kind of applied it to societal issues in his book, Democracy, the God That Failed. Can you talk about how looking at interest rates in earlier time periods demonstrated intelligence?
Well, credit where credit is due. It's not me, is it? It's Greg Clark who looked at that in his book A Farewell to Arms, and I just quoted the information. But it's the idea of how one of the correlates of intelligence is time preference. So how little of a reward do you need? How far into the future to do something now, to make a sacrifice now? And people who are more intelligent, they tend to be future focused. So they won't require much of a reward in the future to make a sacrifice now. So they'll be planning for their future and whatever. Whereas people who are less intelligent, they are present focused. They require, therefore, a much larger reward in the future to make a much smaller sacrifice now. And so the prime example of this is the so-called marshmallow test, where you say to a child, you can either have one marshmallow now or two marshmallows in, 10 minutes time if you don't touch the first marshmallow. And overwhelmingly, more intelligent children will wait for the second marshmallow, whereas the less intelligent children, they live in the now. It's too long to wait. They want it now. And so they take the first marshmallow and don't get the second marshmallow. Now, with interest rates, what is interest rates? It's that I am making a sacrifice now by giving you money. And so I need something in the future to justify making that sacrifice now. So if you're not very intelligent, you're going to need quite quickly the money back, and you're going to need a lot of interest to justify the unpleasantness you are experiencing now. Whereas a person who is more intelligent will need less of a reward in the future to justify the unpleasantness of not having the money now. And he will also be higher in trust. That's another thing. People that are more intelligent are higher in trust. So he will trust more that he'll get the money back. And so this means that falling interest rates will be a sign of a more intelligent society, all else being equal.
Is there an appropriate time in one's life, age-wise, to where you can say the IQ test should be taken now for an accurate measurement of an IQ? Because I've heard also this criticism, well, you can't do this with a kid that's 5 years old. It's not gonna read correctly. Is there an appropriate time?
Well, there are different kinds of IQ tests that are aimed at pupils, assuming that they've been taught to read, that are aimed at pupils of different ages. Mm-hmm. So you get the progressive matrices, you get something called the coloured progressive matrices, and this is aimed at younger children. So and it requires much less of an ability to read. It's just identifying patterns. So as long as the child has all of the children have a reasonable level of literacy. I mean, I've seen IQ tests have been administered to 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds. So some countries, of course, don't start even teaching kids to read till that age. But somewhere like America, they're learning to read when they're 5, and so by the time they're 6 or 7, they could be administered. And often you've got to remember that the psychologist is reading it out to them. The psychologist is sitting there with them. They don't even necessarily have to be able to read that well. They just have someone say, look, here's this pattern, here's this, here's this, here's this. Which one comes next? What do you think? And they just have to look at the patterns. So I don't think there's any problem there. I think more of a problem is that your IQ is obviously, it's your intelligence quotient. So it's your intelligence in relation to people of your own age. And this is important because your objective intelligence, i.e. your ability to solve cognitive problems and how quickly you solve them, goes up with age till about middle age and then starts to decrease. So you reach like an intellectual peak in your 40 or something like that. And then it starts to go down. So it has to be against people your own age. But even so, people's intelligence will change within limitations with reference to those of their own age based on, firstly, environmental factors. So obviously, if they stop hanging around with intelligent people and stimulating their minds and pushing it to their phenotypic maximum and start taking drugs and sodding around, then their IQ will go down. But also environmental factors. So some people, for example, develop very quickly. And if they develop very quickly, they go through puberty very early, this will boost their brain size and they will be more intelligent with reference to, let's say, people of their own age that haven't gone through puberty yet. One of the problems this can bring about is in England, they used to, well, it's still around, but not as common as it was, something called the 11 plus, which was an exam that you took aged 11. And it determined whether you went to a grammar school, which would be more academic and sort of push you towards going to university or some sort of more cognitive job, or whether you went to a secondary modern, which would focus you towards a trade, being a sort of working class person. But the correlation between IQ aged 11 and aged 18 is something like 0.6. So there's plenty of room, and of course it happens for people who failed their 11 plus to then do very well and to end up at university and whatever, and for people who passed their 11 plus to do very badly at school and so on. So that's the kind of thing that has to be taken into account. So I would think if you were going to administer an IQ test like that, a better age would be something like 15, when IQ seems to be more sort of settled.
Can you really quickly explain for those curious or who haven't heard these type of discussions, when you say a 0.6 or a 0.8, can you explain quickly what that is?
Well, we're talking about a relationship between two variables. I mean, I must say this is something that I've had to very much be self-taught or taught by colleagues, because I originally did a theology degree, and I've just sort of come in and a doctorate in religious studies, and then I've come into this via my interest in religion and whatever, into a more quantitative approach. So I have every sympathy with people that aren't familiar with it. But it's the relationship between two variables. So if there is a relationship of noughts, if the two things are acting at random, it's naught. If it's a complete, clear, 100% relationship every time this goes up, that's a relationship of 1. Or the other way around, if this goes down, -1, and anything between the two, so between 0.1 and 0.9. So if I say there is a correlation of 0.8 between intelligence and, I don't know, let's say 0.5 between intelligence and how educated you are, like what your highest qualification is, 0.5, that's a medium range qualification. So it means that, the relationship is there, it's quite a robust relationship, but there's going to be plenty of people that are less clever than other people, but are more educated than them. And if I say it's a relationship of 0.8, well, then there will be very few people who are going to be less intelligent but more educated. You see, and so on. So it's just the strength of the relationship.
I think something that people see empirically, and it's hard to argue this, is the association between fertility and intelligence now, and that's really kind of the issue, I think, at the heart of what you're writing. Let's get into that, basically, because it does seem, unfortunately, that maybe the higher intelligence types are having less children than not. Can we talk about that?
Well, it doesn't seem like it is. It's undoubtedly the case, and we've got data on it from numerous developed countries that the more intelligent people have fewer children. This is particularly pronounced among women. It's more pronounced among women than men, of course, because women have the menopause and so forth, and if they dedicate their 20s and their first half of their 30s to their careers, it will limit their fertility. So it's more than it will among men. It's also more pronounced in America among black women than among white women. But these relationships exist. People that are more intelligent are less inclined to have children. Now, part of this could be these processes that I mentioned earlier, that better use of more efficient use of contraception. There's a correlation between intelligence of about 0.3 and something called openness, which means that people are more interested in kind of ideas and things like that, and so they're more kind of indoctrinatable. So they're just sort of more interested in other things, perhaps. As I said, the welfare system seems to push up, seems to be causal in the strength of this relationship. So there's a number of factors involved. But interestingly, people that are less intelligent, are more intelligent, seem to literally want fewer children. They desire fewer children, and they are more likely to achieve their desire of having fewer children. And you have this same phenomenon in ancient Rome, in ancient Greece, in ancient Baghdad. And I've thought more since I wrote Our Wits End about the causes. And I think that one thing is that it might just be a sort of evolutionary mismatch. If you are more intelligent, then you are going to be more sensitive to the environment because you will take in more information, allowing you to better solve problems. And indeed, it could be that if you are more intelligent, you will literally be sort of lower in instinct. You will be less instinctive because you will be more able to put aside your instincts and cognitively solve the problem. And so what that would mean is that intelligent people would be more reliant on the correct evolutionary roadmap being set out for them by society in order to do adaptive things. But they're less instinctive. Their drives to do instinctive things like have children or whatever are going to be lower. And so if they're put in an environment which is telling them that it's good not to have children, mm-hmm. and that's indoctrinating them with ideas that like life is pointless and, these negative ideas, they will be better able, they will be more likely to be in an evolutionary mismatch where they feel that everything's gone wrong and they feel this dysphoria and therefore they don't want to have children. And they will be more likely to be sensitive to this, and it will be more likely to make them not go along the right roadmap of life, which we are adapted to be pushed along by our group, because they will be more strongly sensitive to being in just the right evolutionary environment, mm-hmm. Than will people that are more instinctive. And you can see that with sort of animals. I mean, you can get animals and take them away. They don't have a childhood. They're just born able to get on with things in a lot of cases, and they just have these instincts and they live by them. And the more complex you are, in a sense, the less instinctive you are, and the more reliant you are on being correctly directed by your pack, by your group, in order to achieve adaptive evolutionary ends. And I think there's some evidence that people that are more intelligent are, it's part of a suite of traits which involves being more sensitive to your environment anyway, intelligence, and B, simply it may be inherent in the nature of intelligence that involves being sort of lower in instinct and more sensitive to your environment. So I think that's relevant. And then thirdly, the fact that we are now in an environment which is literally pushing on us this idea that we should feel guilty to have children and all this stuff would be absorbed more strongly by intelligent people. Indeed, there is evidence that intelligent people are more socially conformist. There's this concept called the cultural mediation hypothesis, whereby intelligent people are better at norm mapping. They're better at understanding what the view is of the group and convincing themselves of its veracity, and then competing to signal that view in order to attain social status. Now, in normal pre-industrial world, that would be fine, and it would mean that they would end up having status and children. But in this world, it's like an evolutionary mismatch where they can be indoctrinated with something maladaptive. So I think that's these are perhaps some reasons why what's going on is going on.
That almost sounds like the analogy that a smarter dog is easy to train.
Well, yes, you would expect a smart. Yes, that would make a great deal. That's a good point. I might write that down.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah, they're easier to indoctrinate.
Yes, I would go around to there's a store in America called Whole Foods that higher end people shop at and who you would assume might be more intelligent. And they were the ones wearing 3 masks on their face and plastic face shields over the last year. And a lot of us were like, what are you doing? But I found that interesting. And then I thought of this. I heard someone say a smarter dog's easier to train. And that's kind of what it seemed like what was going on there.
Yeah, that's a good point. A smarter American is easier to train.
Yes.
It's easier to train on.
For all things CBD related, there is only one stop for you guys. That is PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Once again, PalomaVerdeCBD.com. It is owned by some friends of mine, a wonderful couple out of San Antonio, Carlos and Vanessa. Extremely genuine, extremely fun to hang out and party with, I can tell you that. But really, they're truly very hard workers, and they put a lot of love and special touches into this company, PalomaVerdeCBD.com. It really made me proud to have them as a sponsor. Just to list a few of their products, I'll go ahead and tell you some. They've got the Sleep Bundle Combo Pack. They've got the Mint CBD Tinctures. They got several flavors of the CBD tinctures. And I love the Cool Menthol Sports Cream. The moment you have a sore muscle, I'm not just saying this to sell it. It was genuinely the best sports cream I've ever used before. And it was amazing. I love it. I'm glad to have them as a sponsor so I get this stuff. And you know who really loves them? Selflessly. My favorite stuff that they provide is the pet stuff. And that's because my French Bulldog Lux needs this stuff. The CBD dog chews and the pet CBD tinctures. We put it on his food every morning.
This has been the Counterflow Podcast,
like
a part of the Renegade Media
He used to walk
Network.
around like a little old man, French Bulldog, and now he's like a very young and tough French Bulldog. He races me around the house because of these CBD products. I'm so glad to have these guys as a sponsor. Please give them business. They're very wonderful people, like-minded individuals, and I've got a promo code for you. So if you enter BUCK, that's my name, Buck, at checkout, you will get 25% off of your order over $75. That's 25% off everything over $75. Please give them a visit, PalomaVerdeCBD.com, enter promo code BUCK, and you will be extremely happy that you paid this wonderful couple a visit and gave them some business. Let's get back to the show. What are the, well, before I ask you common criticisms, because I think I could probably lay some of those out myself, I'm guessing, but do you get criticisms on the thesis of this book that make you actually question it, that do seem higher end criticisms where you think, okay, maybe this person has a point?
Well, it depends what. No. I've never thought they've had a point, but no. Well, you tell me what the issues were that occurred to you.
Well, I assume the pointless criticisms are just going to be things that I've heard. IQ's not an accurate test.
Well, it correlates Correct. With all different measures.
It's
and so,
culturally biased, things like that.
Evidence, as it's demonstrated, it's not culturally biased because the people that are culturally excluded do better on the more culturally biased tests. And if it works, so that's evidently untrue.
And then, of course, one that you write about in here, which I'd like you to discuss, is something called the Flynn effect. Because I've heard people say, well, this is not true. IQs are actually going up over this certain period of time.
Then they have no understanding of the Flynn effect.
Yeah, can you talk about that?
The Flynn effect is so basically let's conceive of intelligence as a sort of a pyramid. At the base of the pyramid are these what we call specialized abilities that are very, very weakly associated with IQ, such as the ability to catch a ball or reel off a string of numbers or something like that are very weakly associated with IQ. Then as you move up the pyramid, these can be factored down into 3 basic kinds of intelligence: linguistic intelligence, mathematical intelligence, and spatial intelligence. And these some people are higher at mathematical and lower at linguistic or whatever, but these themselves intercorrelate. And these can be factored down into one factor, which is really the essence of intelligence, the ability to solve problems. And this is what we call G, general intelligence. Now, the IQ test is not a perfect measure of G. It's not a perfect measure of this general intelligence factor. It measures other things influence it. In the same way that a scales is not a particular individual scales is not necessarily a perfect measure of weight. If you want a really, really absolutely accurate reading, you know, some of them will be more influenced by the environment, what's going on in the environment around it or whatever than others. And so what happened with the Flynn effect is that one of these specialized abilities, or a number of these specialized abilities, which relate to the ability to it sort of mimics intelligence, the ability to think in an analytic way. It's something like that. This ability has gone up across the 20th century, consistent with a rise of about 2.5 IQ points per decade. Now, obviously, we cannot have been becoming 2.5 IQ points per decade more intelligent for the last 100 years, because if we were, then we would be geniuses compared to our ancestors 100 years ago. But on every other measure that correlates with intelligence you can think of, this has gone down over the last 100 years. So something else is going on. And what was happening was that when this guy, Jim Flynn, and also my colleague, Richard Lynn, Jim Flynn, by the way, endorsed my book, and you know, on the back of the book, gave it a dust jacket quote, and was very helpful with the book. Anyway, what he noticed was that what was driving this IQ point, this IQ increase, was this particular specialized abilities. When he broke up the subcomponents of the IQ test and saw how people were scoring on what subcomponent, and it was the subcomponent known as similarities, which is weakly G loaded and is to do with these analytical abilities, that was almost completely driving the rise. And so that was what was happening. What was happening was that for this highly environmentally sensitive thing that's got very little to do with genetics, highly environmentally sensitive. When you look at intelligence, it's like some components of it are highly genetic of intelligence, like the G, and some components of it are to do with highly sensitive to environment. Like when you grow, how big your body is, your trunk. This is to do with genetics. But how long your legs are, that's much more to do with environment. And so you could imagine a situation where we are getting taller because our legs are getting longer, because the environment is changing. But at the genetic level, the trunk element, we're actually getting shorter. And eventually what would happen is that our legs would reach their phenotypic maximum height. Height would plateau, and this is happening, by the way. Height has plateaued for the last 50 years. And then you might even find that height starts to go down as the underlying genetic process pokes through. And something like this can be said to have been happening with the Flynn effect. So whatever was happening on the genetic components of the IQ test or on the more G-loaded components of the IQ test, this specialized ability was being pushed really, really fast up to its phenotypic maximum, which meant that how this was being recorded in the IQ test was an IQ score increase. No matter what was happening on G or the more genetic components or whatever, how it was being recorded on the IQ test, which is not a perfect measure of intelligence, remember, was an increase. And what you would predict would happen is eventually we would reach our phenotypic maximum in this specialized ability, which we did, and then it would plateau, which it has, and then it would start to go down, which it has, as the underlying other factors would then start to poke through. So it was cloaking what was going on the more genetic and on the more G-loaded elements of the IQ test, and that was a decline. And since about 1998, we have seen in various Western countries that IQs are in decline. So it was simply, I must emphasize, this Flynn effect is very real. I mean, it's a very real thing. If you push people's this specialized ability to its maximum, that has effects. It means people are better at certain things. And so it can have sort of economic effects, socioeconomic effects, for you to be pushed to your maximum on the similarities. It's an important thing. But it's an illusion in the sense that, in the very specific sense that, it's not on G. And once, as I say, the phenotypic maximum was reached, then the underlying changes that are more genetic start to be seen on the tests. And what basically Flynn argues is that over the course of the 20th century, we adopted what he calls scientific spectacles, i.e. the nature of the environment has compelled us to think in a more scientific way, in a more analytical way. And it is this process, this environmental process that has brought the Flynn effect about.
Can I get your thoughts on the cyclical model of history? Because that's something I've been researching as of late, and I find it fascinating, to say the least, versus the fall and linear models of history.
Well, the fall is the idea that our best days are behind us. There's a kind of golden age, and all we can hope to do is sort of imitate that golden age. I look at this in the book. In some ways, that was the view in the 16th century, that the best days were behind us, they were Rome, and we should just imitate what they do. So we should learn Latin, we should learn Greek to a lesser extent, we should imitate classical styles, and we should try and get back to that. The linear view of history is this idea that this rather sort of Christian idea or monotheistic idea that we are moving towards, that things can only get better, if you like. You also see it in Marxism, and that we are moving towards a utopia. As far as I can see, an analysis of history is not consistent with either of these models. And an analysis of history is consistent with the idea that civilizations rise and fall. And as I argue in the book, and I can only base this on per capita major innovations, because that we do have data on even from classical times, the rise and fall of civilizations relates to the rise and fall of intelligence. And what seems to happen again and again and again is that a group is under harsh selection pressure, harsh Darwinian selection pressure. It selects for intelligence. On the one hand, it selects for genetic health, including mental health. It selects for ethnocentrism, because groups that are under harsh levels of Darwinian selection are kind of under group selection. They're battling with other groups for resources. And the groups that are more internally cooperative and more externally hostile tend to dominate. And therefore, it selects for religiousness, because religiousness tends to take whatever is adaptive and make that into the will of God. And these things all sort of clump together, and it selects for that certain kind of society. And eventually you get breakthroughs, you get the creation, intelligence becomes high enough or whatever, that you get the development of a civilization, not necessarily as brilliant as our industrial civilization, but some sort of civilization. And once this happens, then because people are more intelligent, because people are in an evolutionary mismatch, because the level of stress is lower, and stress is one of the mortality salience is lower, and these are correlates of religion, and because the Darwinian selection pressures for all of these things are weakened, then you're going to get a sort of a rise in mutation, really, and from this group-oriented society, and the rise of individualistic, more and more individualistic people, more and more irreligious people, more and more non-group-oriented people, more and more unhealthy people, more and more stupid people. And those people will question the system, they will question the religion, they will question everything. And then, of course, as we know, more intelligent people in that mismatch, they being more sensitive or more or less instinctive, tend not to have children. And so then you find that intelligence goes down, per capita innovation goes down, the religion collapses, you get a rise in immigration because everything becomes about money, because people no longer believe in anything being eternally important. You get a rise in feminism because the religion that suppresses feminism and things like this collapses. You get a rise in individualism, you get a rise in nihilism, you get a rise in all of these different sort of pathologies that you see towards the winter of civilization. It's a very interesting book by Sir John Glubb on this, called The Rise and Fall of Civilization, or something, I forget what it's called, by Sir John Glubb, Pasha Glubb. And he looks at this and he says, with Baghdad, with Athens, with Rome, and with us, the parallels are uncanny. Even in Baghdad, you get women becoming imams, And so then eventually you just get this. Then your trust falls because you get immigration. Immigration causes trust to collapse because people tend to want to be with people that are similar to themselves, and they tend to distrust their own group more because they're concerned that some members will collaborate against them with the other group, and whatever. And so you end up with this collapse and this the coming apart of society, and then going backwards, being unable to do things you used to be able to do. And then when something really bad hits in, like a plague or something, you're no longer intelligent enough to be able to solve the problem in a way that you previously could, because everyone's so impulsive and so genetically sick. And then you just get a serious collapse in population. So you see this with Rome. People talk about the fall of Rome as being 410, but it was 100 years after that you had the Great Justinian Plague, which wiped out 60% of the population. So these are and then people just go back to a simpler way of life, and that seems to me to be what happens again and again and again. And the bigger they are, the harder they fall. We have now created a population, only about 10% of whom would have survived under the conditions that were present in 1800, and so we've got a larger and larger and larger percentage of the population that are completely reliant on this high civilization, which, okay, our IQ is going down, but we're able to keep kind of progressing because just through sort of micro innovations, just through sort of tinkering, adding a little bit on to what's already been done, because what's been done is so massive and enormous. And so you don't have to be that intelligent. It's like the difference between inventing a car and fixing a car or updating a car. You don't have to be as intelligent to update a car as to fix it, or we're as to invent it. So, but we're the kind of updaters, but eventually, you have to have a certain level of intelligence to successfully update things and to successfully maintain things. As intelligence goes down, we won't be able to do even that. And so when that starts to happen, then you have serious, a collapse would be on the cards.
Yeah, I always like to end these on a happy note, but as I concluded your book, it says, so winter is coming and it's only going to get colder. What's your prognosis for the short and long term?
I think we are now in winter. If I said winter is coming, that was a few years ago. I think we are now definitely in winter, and you can see the coming apart of America. It's happening before our eyes in slow motion. And I think that if anything made me realize that we're not winter coming, it's in winter. It was the pandemic plus the George Floyd riots of last year. And that was clear to me that we're in winter. The major society, the Rome of our time, is breaking up. Is a fundamental lack of trust, completely taken over by individualistic values as opposed to the group-oriented values that build up a society and hold it together and are prominent at its heights. And it's going to come apart and fall apart, and it'll probably fall apart quite quickly. Certainly in the next 100 years. We're currently writing, we're just finishing a sequel to Our Wits End, which will be out next year, or the year after next year, where we look at in more detail at how the collapse will take place based on the available data. But I think this is this is a period of massive, this I suspect is a massive shift that is happening now, just like happened in the 60s between individualistic society and a group-oriented society and individualistic society. Now what we're seeing is that we've had this flip, this switch that took over in the 60s, whereby individualistic values took over. Therefore, you signal for those. Therefore, the society becomes more individualistic. But at the same time that's been happening, it's the group-oriented people and the low IQ people that breed. These left-wing people that have these individualistic values, they tend not to breed. But they've managed to take power because people who are sort of right-wing, they have all five of these so-called moral foundations. Their group, they are into sanctity, they are into obeying the leader, they're into loyalty to the group, and they're into equality and harm avoidance. The left are mainly into equality and harm avoidance. So the right will always cede ground to them, and will do that until an extreme evolutionary mismatch is reached. And then you'll start to get a right-wing backlash. And I think that you're seeing that alone should happen. But if you take that together with the fact that it's the people that are genetically, for genetic reasons, more right-wing and conservative and religious that are breeding, and the fact that people that have low IQ tend to be more conservative anyway, then I think, and that's why I think there's all this tension now, because we're at this polarization turning point, and I would say that over the next 20 years, things are going to really come apart, and probably quite quickly, like the Soviet Union.
Mm. Wow, that's a lot to digest, especially to end with. But this has been truly enjoyable, Edward. Can you plug any of your work really right now that you'd like? Your social media presence, anything that you?
So I have a channel called The Jolly Heretic,
Yes.
on various places, with YouTube and BitChute and Odyssey. I live stream once a week on Mondays and Thursdays at 7 p.m. UK time, 2 p.m. New York time. I have on Twitter at Jolly Heretic. What's my latest book? My latest book is Islam: An Evolutionary Perspective. I think that's my newest book, and I've got a book coming out soon on feminism. I'm just finishing that at the moment. Yes, so if this interests you, then you might be interested in some more of my books.
Yes, I can vouch for some of his books, and his YouTube channel is The Jolly Heretic is also very entertaining. So I recommend all of that. I will link to this in the show notes page for this episode. Edward Dutton, thank you so much for doing this.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. What a good discussion with Mr. Edward Dutton. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Share this around. Also, if you can go on iTunes, if that's the platform that you use to hear this podcast, that is, leave a rating and a review. I love reading the reviews on there. Not all of them are, glowing. Most of them are pretty damn good. There's a few funny ones that aren't very good. So go check those out and then leave a nice one, if you will. And join us in the Telegram group. If you've got the Telegram app on your phone, you can search our room, Counterflow with Buck Johnson. Join us in there. Lots of good discussion. Great people in that room. Really great people, smart people. And it makes me happy to be a part of that. And the webpage, counterflowpodcast.com, is up and running. My friend Bobby Pearson got that going. And you can find Death to Tyrants shirts on clearance on that webpage for $10. I've got like 3 more, honestly. So by the time some of you hear this broadcast, they will be gone. If you order them and they're gone, I give you a refund immediately. Don't worry. You're not wasting your money. And if they're gone, I'll try to get Bobby to take that ad off of there. But we also have Counterflow podcast t-shirts, brand new ones. The artwork is beautiful on them. The aesthetic is very cool. My man, Neocon Remover from Twitter, the king of Twitter, did the artwork himself, designed that. So go check out counterflowpodcast.com. And until next week, you guys have a good one. See ya.
You get split in fucking half, but I call the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.